World building is challenging, but there's a process I found on Pinterest that makes it easy, and that process is GRAPES, which stands for geography, religion, achievements, politics, economics, and social structure. Let's just start at the beginning. Geography. This is what I like to set up first, but you can go in whatever order you want. The best way to set up geography is to draw a map. It doesn't have to be an artistically sound map, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we continue. Geography includes everything from what the land looks like to important landmarks. As we move forward, I'm going to be referencing Dune because I just got finished reading it, so I'm very familiar with the grapes of the story. I also don't think that it has a map at the beginning like most fantasy novels do nowadays. So you have Arrakis, and there's a city, and then you have desert, and those are sort of the most important features of the planet. The city is safe from worms because it's on rock, but beyond that, it is mostly sand, right? Wrong. You have regular sand, drum sand, spice, you have large mesas, and sietches. Plus, if you go really far to the south, you have some spaces with greenery. All of that would be a landmark on your map as an author because since you're writing the story, you sort of need to know where things are even if your reader doesn't. For example, there's a scene where Paul has to get a pack out of the sand. We know that it's very close to a sietch because of story progression, but there's a space of regular sand stretching from the mesa all the way to the sietch, and it's several kilometers wide. So let's say you have your pack here. And here's how you can make your map easy to understand without doing a bunch of detailed drawing. Add as much detail as possible by adding words that indicate where different things are. And I sort of segued into talking about one particular scene, so let's go back to looking at the whole map before we start discussing religion. If you want to know about the different regions of your world, you just map that out and then write little notes on what's what. For example, pre-spice masses attract worms given the right conditions, and large mesas house suitable caves for freeman survival. Religion can be a little bit of a tricky one to map out. As a discovery writer, I typically come up with 1 to 2 major religions and then flesh them out as I write, but it's good to have a basic structure for each religion. Let's talk about Dune's religious systems. The most important one is the Ben Gesserit, but you also have the Freeman religion that worships Shai Hulud. The Ben Gesserit are essentially preparing the world for their messiah, the Kwisatz Haderach, and in order to do that, they are selectively breeding different bloodlines based on prophecies. So what are the important parts of this to consider when designing your own religions? Let's break it down. Is the religion poly or monotheistic? The Freeman religion is monotheistic, and the Ben Gesserit don't really have a clearly defined deity, but you could argue that their messiah is their deity. And the other thing that you want to do is to try to understand what it is that your religion is trying to accomplish. If you want to make your novel particularly interesting, you could try looking at it from the lens of what happens after your religion receives their messiah and how the world would respond to that. Are they ritualistic? Do they worship in groups or by themselves? Is there a lot of mysticism? Do their gods actually exist in the physical realm, or are they just metaphysical? And how do interactions with their gods typically go? If you're enjoying this video so far, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. The next part of our mnemonic is achievements. When looking at achievements, you need to consider each region or faction individually, and if you have different races, you may need to consider what achievements the different races have accomplished as well. For example, everyone knows that the Roman Empire has accomplished a lot of things. They created aqueducts and developed our road systems that we still use in the contemporary era. If you have a new faction, what types of things are they trying to build? And how might that impact the world around your characters? If the ruling class is trying to build something large and impressive, are they using slaves? Your characters might then witness slave trades in markets, or possibly even be one of the slaves themselves. If your faction has already been established for a long time, what have they achieved? Do travelers come to witness their grand gardens, or maybe they have really popular public bathhouses? Perhaps there's a large building that represents something wicked and your characters are trying to overthrow it. And if there's a faction that's long since dead, what remains of it? Are there ruins of beautiful structures? Or perhaps the structures are maintained for the economy. Maybe the economy exists because of that dead faction. All of these are things you need to consider when creating achievements. Politics. That's a dreaded word. Who knew I'd be talking about politics in a creative writing video? The best way to come up with your politics is to develop a few factions. The most important thing to consider when creating factions is what's that faction's goal and what is getting in the way of them achieving that goal. If we look back at Dune, a few of the prominent factions are the Freemen, the Guild, the Sardaukar, and the Harkonnens. The Freemen want to terraform Arrakis in a natural way that will expand many generations. The Guild wants money, the Sardaukar want to accomplish whatever it is the Emperor wants to accomplish, and the Harkonnens want to overthrow the Emperor. Of course, each faction has its own obstacles. The Freemen have opposing factions and the threat of off-world surveillance, not to mention the time required to terraform their planet. The Guild requires cooperation with the Freemen to get money. The Sardaukar have difficulty fighting the Freemen, which is not something they expected, and the Harkonnens need money. The last thing to evaluate for factions is what they're doing to maintain the balance trying to accomplish their goals. The Freemen have to pay the Guild in order to keep satellites out of the sky. The Guild keeps their word with the Freemen when they pay. The Sardaukar leave Arrakis after the initial attack. And the Harkonnens enslave people and then abuse their slaves in order to meet their quotas. Now, just to recap, your factions need to have a goal, a roadblock that gets in the way of that goal, and something that they're doing to try to overcome that roadblock. And in a lot of instances, you'll find that finances impact what your factions do, if you could believe that. Which means that you need to have an economic system. This doesn't mean that you have to have different types of currency, but you do have to know how money works for your people. For example, the Freemen treat water as currency, but other stories go so far as to have different names for their currency, like in Harry Potter. And yet other books, like The Name of the Wind, base their currency system loosely on medieval currency that is no longer in use today. The important thing to consider for your economy is what a person with wealth's life might look like and what the impoverished person's life looks like, and how the cost of goods reflects those statuses. In the Harkonnen city, you could probably guess that goods would be expensive because the Harkonnens are oppressing the people and making it difficult for them to earn wages. But in the Freeman society, they understand the importance of water to survival. Rather than keep water to themselves, they signify status by giving people water chips. And if there's one day when someone's still suit doesn't function quite right and they're at a deficit for their water, instead they give someone water and incur a water debt. Personally, I like to create my own currency systems, but I'd love to hear what your currency systems look like in your book, so please comment down below. The last letter in our mnemonic is social structure. To establish a good social structure, you need to take all of the factions that you've made into consideration for how your social structure works. Once again, let's use Dune as an example. The Freemen use strength in order to determine who their leaders are. They do this through regular duels to the death, just like the Agni Kai in Avatar: The Last Airbender. However, the Freemen would not have to resort to such measures if they didn't live in such deplorable conditions. The book is constantly referring to how a hard planetary system creates a powerful people, and they do this by culling the weak. However, when you no longer have to rely on a primitive combat system, rulers like the great and minor houses emerge and things get much more bureaucratic. We're above such petty squabble. Bureaucracy leads to things like oppression of the lower class, squabbling over land and resources, and deception and spies. After all, each of the houses has a mentat, just like Hawat, and the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen goes so far as to say he feels naked without his mentat. Essentially, the most important part of your social structure is to determine what power struggles might look like depending on what class your character is in. If this video is helpful, be sure to subscribe, as this was part 2 of my book writing basics series. Next week, I'll be going over how to write complex characters that actually make your reader care. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!